You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is July 28th, 2024, and this is episode 288 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we'll hear a conversation about a lighthouse in one of the most unique and special places in the U.S., Key West, Florida. I have a very special co-host for this episode, Ralph Krugler, who is the historian for the Hillsborough Inlet Lighthouse in Florida. Hi, Ralph.
Hi, Jeremy. How's it going?
It's going good. It's not
Good.
as hot here as it's been lately. Is it as hot as it can be in Florida? How is it where you are?
It's like walking into a wet blanket when you walk outside. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's been it hasn't been hot by Florida standards, I'm sure, here in New Hampshire, but it's been a record hot summer. It's been in the 90s and humid a lot, but I'm sure it's been worse where you are. So anyway,
We've had a lot of heat index warnings lately. So yeah, stay inside.
Yeah. Hope you have decent air conditioning. So our listeners will recall, I'm sure, that you've been on the podcast before several times. And they may recall that you also work for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. You are very actively working on the digital archives and the research catalog, kind of moving stuff from our larger digital archives into the online research catalog for people to access. And you also help out with social media, among other things. So I thank you very much for co-hosting today, Ralph.
No, it's my pleasure. Glad to do it.
So is there anything new and exciting happening with Hillsborough Inlet Lighthouse?
Well, other than I work there officially now, we are trying to raise an insane amount of money. We're shooting for $750,000 because we have to do a lot of restoration work, and we're hoping to paint it this year, but after doing some research into it and some investigations, we discovered we have a couple more things we need to fix before we paint. So, like the last time, they basically just put a Band-Aid on it. This time we need to do it properly. So we need a whole lot of money in order to do this thing properly. And that's been kind of an issue this year.
Yeah. Well, it is a lot of money. These days, in the scheme of things, I guess it's not that much for a lighthouse of that height and that age.
Yep.
But it's not easy to raise in this economic climate. Remind me, how tall is Hillsborough Inlet Lighthouse?
Focal plane's 135. So
Okay.
up to the top of the lightning rod, we're at what, 150 something maybe? I can't remember offhand, but
yeah, that's tall.
yeah.
Bottom line. Yeah. So Ralph, you just mentioned that you are now actually working for the lighthouse, right? Can you explain that?
Yeah. My wife is actually very happy now that when I go to the lighthouse, I'm actually getting paid. I'm civilian employee of the U.S. Coast Guard. The cottages on site there are rental for MWR, maintenance, wellbeing, and recreation. And it used to be just open to Coast Guard. Now it's open to all branches of the service if you have a certain designation. So I'm on site doing a lot of maintenance in the cottages and on the grounds. And pretty soon I'm going to be learning the reservation system and all that other things that go along with it. But I started there in March, and it's been so much fun. I get to go to work and I'm like, really, I'm getting paid to be here. This is so cool.
That's great. Well, in a way, it's a reward for how many years were you a volunteer there?
I'm still a volunteer with the Preservation Society.
Right. Yeah.
But I started that in 2014, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 10 years. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you put your time in there
Yeah.
in various ways. I want to chat with you a little bit more after our interview today. I'd like to actually talk a little bit more about the USLHS research catalog, but first we should get to today's interview. So please help me out, Ralph.
Sure, Jeremy. The Key West Lighthouse has stood as a well-loved landmark in one of America's most colorful cities since 1848, when it replaced an earlier lighthouse that began service in 1826. The original tower was destroyed by a hurricane in 1846. The tower that stands today is constructed of brick and stands 73 feet tall.
After the navigational light was discontinued in 1969, the property was turned over to Monroe County. It was then leased to the Key West Arts and Historical Society. The society opens the lighthouse to the public and also manages a museum in the former keeper's house. A centerpiece of the museum is a first-order Fresnel lens from the Sombrero Key Lighthouse.
Dr. Cori Convertito is the curator and historian for the Key West Arts and Historical Society, which manages 3 sites in addition to the lighthouse. Cori is also the executive director of the Society for the History of Navy Medicine.
It was a real pleasure speaking with Cori recently, so let's listen to that conversation now. I'm speaking this afternoon with Dr. Cori Convertito, who is the curator and historian for the Key West Arts and Historical Society. And the primary thing we're going to be talking about today is the Key West Lighthouse. Thanks so much for joining me today, Cori.
Oh, happy to be here.
I've been to Key West only once in my life. It was in 1999, October 99. There was a big lighthouse conference that your organization actually held at that time. And it was going really well, but then a hurricane was approaching, Hurricane Irene, if I remember correctly, in October 99. And I stayed through it. It was quite an experience. I won't get deeply into detail on that, but I hope I can get back and not have a hurricane the next time I come.
Yeah, that's what we all hope, right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Here.
Well, it's an amazing place. I was looking, you have a very impressive background in terms of your education, your experience with maritime history. So what led you to your current position with the Key West Arts and Historical Society? And maybe from now on, I should say KWAHS, but it's still hard for me to remember.
Mouthful, right?
But what led you to that position?
I had lived here before. I actually moved down here about a month before you came on vacation here, the one time you were on the island for the conference. And I had taken a position with another museum. I had always wanted to work in museums. And when the opportunity came up to pursue my master's and PhD in England, I took that. And when I returned with both my degrees being in maritime history, there was an offer to come to the Art and Historical Society, which operates the lighthouse. And I thought it was a really good fit for what my background is, how the lighthouse had operated and the other sites the society works on. So it was a natural fit for my education and what their needs were at the time.
So let's, before we talk specifically about the lighthouse, let's talk a little bit more about the other properties the society manages. I know there are others besides the lighthouse. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, so currently we operate 4 distinct museum sites on the island of Key West. First one that we operated is Fort East Martello Museum. It's a Civil War era fort that was built as a support fort to the main fort on the island. So we have a lot in a small place. Then we took over the lighthouse with its keeper's quarters. And then we took over the Museum of Art and History. And finally, we added the Tennessee Williams Museum. So they all have a very different flavor. We cover different topics within each of those. And it's a lot of work. And we're adding a 5th museum probably by the end of the year that is the old Key West jail. So we'll be operating that as well.
Wow.
We're happy to be stewards for all these historic properties.
As if you didn't have enough to do, I'm sure. But
right.
No, but that's great. That sounds really exciting. And the Tennessee Williams Museum, that's a fairly recent development, isn't it?
Yeah, we took that in 2017. The original founders of that were aging out, didn't want the day in, day out responsibilities for the museum that they had founded. And they asked us to take it in under our umbrella, which we happily did because Tennessee Williams contributed quite a bit to our city, and we were delighted. And they're still very much involved. They just didn't want the day-to-day operations of it. So it was a nice add-on and something we weren't really covering, that literary tradition here in Key West.
And that is, of course, one of the things Key West is known for, is the literary tradition, including, of course, the Hemingway House in town as well, which is run by a separate organization, though.
It is,
right?
yes.
So let's talk about the history of the light station, starting with the first lighthouse tower, which was, remind me what year the first lighthouse was built?
Congress appropriated money in 1824 to build that tower, and they subsequently sent supplies down and was completed soon after.
And why was a lighthouse needed in Key West at that time?
Well, we have a very dangerous shallow coral reef right off of this archipelago, and we only became really permanently settled in 1822, so it was pretty quick that the U.S. government recognized the need, and it was mostly the Navy that recognized the need for lighthouses or navigational aids to be placed throughout this region, not just in Key West, but the length of the Florida Keys. And so they earmarked the need for it. Ships were wrecking on the reef in good weather because it was unmarked on many charts. and there was no navigational aids. Congress appropriated the money. They built the tower, not exactly where they wanted to initially. They had selected Sombrero Keys, which is about 12 miles southeast of us. And Commodore David Porter, who was the Navy Commodore who actually came to Key West in 1823 and established Naval Station Key West, began a pretty vigorous letter writing campaign to Washington, advocating for a lighthouse to actually be built in Key West versus Sambo. And we think that was the right call because it was twofold. One, to mark the reef, two, to mark the entrance to the channel, the deep water port that Key West has. So he got his way, and they decided to build the lighthouse on an area they called Whitehead's Point, which is the southwesternmost part of the island.
So where are you located in relation to the southeasternmost point in the U.S. in Key West?
The lighthouse is not too far away from Whitehead Point. Our administrative offices are at a different museum, at the Museum of Art and History.
Okay.
It's about half a mile up from where the original tower was, but on much higher ground. And that was the attractiveness for them.
One thing I remember clearly about Key West is such a walkable city. Remind me of the main drag.
It is now Duval Street is the main street, but back 19th century, it would have been Front Street and Whitehead Street, which were the main arteries. That's the closest to the deep water port and where all the warehouses were, and slowly Duval Street has kind of usurped that because that's where a lot of the ancillary businesses established themselves, your general grocers and your clothiers, businesses like that, and that transferred the main artery to Duval Street now.
Well, it's such a nice city to walk around. And remind me of one other fact I was trying to remember. I think I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Key West has more pre-Civil War homes or buildings than any community in the South. Is that close to being correct?
That I've ever heard anyone phrase it like that. Our downtown area is on the National Register of Historic Places because we have so many wooden vernacular structures. I think we have a higher density of them than anywhere else in the country. So we were recognized on the National Register for that, but I don't know about the Civil War, pre or post Civil War connection. I think a lot of them are going to postdate the Civil War. We had a pretty severe fire here in 1886 that destroyed most of our Old Town section. So I think some of them are a little older or newer than the Civil War.
Yeah. Well, before anybody emails me or whatever to correct me, I'll withdraw that statement. But certainly, there's a lot of beautiful old buildings there in Key West. So let's talk about the human history of the lighthouse a bit. The light station. Key West had a woman keeper for a long time in its early history. Can you tell me about her?
Yeah, so we are really fortunate, and I think a little unusual in the fact that we had 3 women lighthouse keepers at our station. The first and longest serving was a woman by the name of Barbara Maberty, who moved here. She actually moved here during the first lighthouse phase with her husband. They originally were from the St. Augustine area. Her husband was Michael, but you'll see him as Miguel because they were Spanish. They were in St. Augustine and that Spanish-Cuban Catholic community there. And they were assigned, her husband was assigned to Key West Lighthouse. So they moved down here. And at the time where the lighthouse was on this Whitehead Point, it's not that far away now. I can see that area from my window at work. But that time it was considered out of town and a really remote job actually to take and quite lonely. Michael had contracted a disease and died, and Key West wasn't comfortable at that time. We had a mosquito problem. We had a small population. We were only accessible by boat, meaning there wasn't a regular supply of food and medicines and clothing and everything you need for a reasonable life. It was hard to come by. So taking that job on a remote island was hard work. And rather than try to find someone else to replace Michael, they promoted Barbara to be the principal lighthouse keeper after his death, which is quite unusual.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that happened in a number of places where wives
Yeah.
inherited the jobs, but she was certainly one of the most notable ones. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
glad you made that point about the place being isolated because of course now you can drive all the way down the Keys, but it was quite quite different
It
at
was
that
very
time.
different, very different. She was very isolated. There was no, she was one of the very few women that actually lived on the island. Never mind the remoteness of the light station from where the developed area was of Key West, but there weren't that many women here either to actually have support for her, the husband, and their 6 kids. So
Hmm.
it had to be, she had to be a really strong woman, I think, to be in this kind of environment.
They're kind of like a pioneer family in a way,
Oh,
really.
absolutely. We actually refer to a lot of our early families as pioneer families because there's a lot of similarities between their situation and folks that packed everything up and wanted to move out west as part of that manifest destiny concept. Coming here and having access to nothing and not really knowing anyone, it's not an easy move.
Talking about the move westward, I guess we kind of expanded in every possible direction on the continent as much as we could.
Yeah.
There was a major hurricane in October 1846, if I remember correctly, that did tremendous damage in the area. Can you tell me what happened at the Key West Lighthouse?
Boy, that hurricane was something. They weren't necessarily categorizing them at that point, but it was called the Great Havana Hurricane, and they probably estimated to be a Category 5 storm that had come up. People were unprepared for it. There was really no way of advance notice. A couple days before, word came from Cuba that the weather was unsettled, but there's not a lot of choice. Where can you go? What can you do? And that storm came in very, very strong. Most of the houses at the time in Key West, or the structures in Key West, are wooden structures. And a lot of the townspeople sought refuge in the Key West Lighthouse Tower because it was a masonite structure and not a wooden structure. And the placement of that particular lighthouse right on Whitehead Point, the storm surge that came in as part of that hurricane caused that entire tower to just topple right into the ocean. And that had a lot of, or not say a lot, we didn't have a huge population then either, but quite a number of civilians were in that tower. And some of Barbara's children were in that tower as well. And we believe died. And one of the other ones was on the island, but he wasn't in the tower, and subsequently died due to injury from a structure on the island when it blew up to smithereens because of the
Yeah.
strong forces of the wind. Yeah, it was a very, very powerful hurricane. There was not really a building that was left untouched. Every building on this island had some level of damage to it. And
Hmm.
the lighthouse tower was gone.
It sounds like we don't really know definitively how many people who were taking shelter at the lighthouse died and or how many people in Barbara Maverdy's family died in the hurricane.
Yeah, so the way that we worked backwards, because there's a lot of fake news about Barbara and her kids, and it makes for a really dramatic story about her being a widow with 6 kids, taking care of a lighthouse on a remote island, and all 6 of her children die, but Barbara finds a way to survive. And going through census records, 2 of her children actually live in Tampa at the time, so couldn't have been here, and the family didn't all die, but we can trace back 3 of the 6 children dying either in the storm or as a direct result of it, in the aftermath of it, because one of the sons, we believe, sustained life-threatening injuries during the storm and succumbed within a couple of days after the storm passed. So we attribute 3 of the 6 children dying to that hurricane of 1846, and we have no idea where Barbara was. We have no record. We don't think she was in the tower.
Really
We don't, because we think her sons were, but not her.
interesting. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's never 100% know exactly what happened.
No,
Sure.
we've scoured. We even looked through all the records up at the National Archives up in DC to try to get a line on any correspondence she may have put in. We've been really unsuccessful in finding that, but everybody on that property probably died just because of its location, and it was completely washed out.
Hmm.
That area is still or the geography changed after that storm because it pulled so much with it as that storm surge receded.
And speaking of damage in that whole general area, there's a Sand Key Lighthouse, which is offshore,
Yeah.
I think approximately 8 miles southwest of Key West. So what happened at that lighthouse in the hurricane?
Well, very similar, same hurricane, same situation. Joshua Appleby was the lighthouse keeper there, and he just happened to have his family visiting just at that time when the hurricane hit. Nowhere to hide. Same thing, big storm surge coming in with it, and it wiped that entire tower out. And Joshua Appleby and the 5 other people that were with him, who just happened to be visitors at that tower, did not survive that. And I think that's part of the reason why that legend of Barbara Maverdy's entire family being wiped out is these 2 stories of cross-pollinated in
Yes.
a way. But Joshua Appleby gets almost no recognition for losing his family or his life out at the Sand Key Lighthouse. The focus really tends to be on the Key West Lighthouse, but the Sand Key Lighthouse collapsed into the ocean. And folks that went out there, there's letters that we've found, some correspondence talking about the fact that they couldn't even find the island after the hurricane went through because the storm surge was so great and must have shifted the sand underneath Sand Key Lighthouse so dramatically that they couldn't really find the island itself because a lot of that sand had gone along with the tower.
Yeah. A lighthouse was rebuilt at Sand Key, right? But isn't it's considered one of the reef lights, right? I don't think is that even really considered an island anymore? I don't think so.
So when they put the reef light out there, there was an island again. There was a Sand Key, and because the weather station was out there, they put the new lighthouse tower out there, which is a metal structure versus a masonry structure. But there was sand underneath it. People who are now getting much older remember going out there and having picnics for the day because
Really? Wow.
they used to be able to take their boat out there and there was a place to be. Now all of that sand is gone. There's no island to visit. Just the tower remains out there.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, when I was there in '99, there was supposed to be a boat ride to see it, but the hurricane cut that short. That didn't quite happen. So I'd love to get back and see that. So how and why did Barbara Maverdy lose her job as keeper?
Again, it's also really tough questions because what we read about online, it makes it sound like she was a real Confederate supporter, a Confederate sympathizer on the island. And we're kind of unique in the fact that when Florida seceded from the Union, Key West remained loyal. We already had the Navy here and we had the Army here. And when the secession orders came in, the federal government had such a big footprint here that the residents didn't really have a choice, even though most of them were Confederate sympathizers. Most of them had moved here from a southern state or had connections or business interests in those states. It was impossible for them not to remain federal. And especially in a situation like Barbara, because Barbara, she had a job from the federal government, right? Working for the Lighthouse Service. And, you had to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States instead of the Confederate States. And so rumor has it that Barbara was very outspoken about her Confederate sympathies, and they got tired of her being on the government's dime for her job and verbally supporting the opposition during the war. While that's probably, some of those bits are probably true, we believe, because most of the people here were Southern sympathizers. She's, again, not an anomaly. She's also 82, doing a very laborious job. She is writing letters to the government asking for more money on a pretty consistent basis and having some residents on the island write in support of paying her more money, which the government doesn't have. And I think there's a combination in there of it was a good excuse to let her go, because at age 82, climbing to the top of the new tower that had replaced the one that collapsed during the hurricane of 1846, it's not an easy job for her. She had her son's couple of kids here to help, and assistant lighthouse keepers, but she's 82.
Yeah.
At some point, and a well-paid 82-year-old, because she had gone up incrementally on the pay scale. I think it was just time. So I think what you read online is they fired her, unceremoniously fired her because of her Confederate leanings. But most of the business people on this island who also had connections to the federal government were Confederate by, heart. So I don't think that was 100% of the reason. I'm sure it had something to do with it. But she was in her 80s.
Yeah, not too many lighthouse keepers, male or female, would still be on the job past the age of 82. That's actually pretty unusual.
Right, right. Yeah, and so I think a lot of those factors came into play.
I guess the bottom line with a lot of this is don't believe everything you read online, at least at face value. Things get
trying to tell them in the museum.
Yeah. Things get stated in a way that, that makes it sound factual, and then gets repeated and repeated and repeated until it becomes, truth in quotes.
Yeah. But also, I think that just the regular story of her being 82 is amazing in and of itself. We don't have to, fold in like the sensationalism of her being a Confederate and thumbing her nose at the federal government while she's on their payroll. It's a very dramatic story, which is entertaining, I think, for people. But her story alone, without all that, is quite fascinating, because there's not a lot of 82-year-olds we can imagine having the roles and responsibilities that she had on that property to maintain the light. And it's not oil being carried up, and cleaning and maintaining and ordering and inventorying. It's a lot. It's a lot for anybody.
Yeah, I completely agree. And she deserves, never mind any dramatic, like you said, dramatic embellishments. She deserves tremendous credit for what she did. And remind me again, I think we said it already, but how many years was she keeper there?
She was there 32 years.
32 years, yeah.
Our longest lighthouse keeper. Yeah.
It's fairly unusual to have a keeper at one place for more than 30 years. There are other cases, certainly, but it's not common. Yeah, it's really impressive. As far as women keepers, off the top of my head, I think there were a couple who were longer. I think there was a woman named Nancy Rose in New York State on the Hudson River, and maybe a few others. But Barbara was up there as one of the longest serving women keepers in history. No doubt about that. Yeah. In a very isolated place. Yeah. So the lighthouse that's there today was built in 1848, replacing the earlier lighthouse. If I have that, do I have the year correct for that?
Yes, it was finished in 48. Yes.
Mm-hmm. A Fresnel lens was installed about 10 years later, and I believe that's the lens that's still in use at the lighthouse, or in place in the lighthouse today. Is that correct?
It is in place. Yeah, we got a third order lens about 10 years after that second Key West lighthouse opened.
That's pretty impressive that a lens installed in the 1850s, a third order lens, is still in place today.
Yeah, and it's in great shape. And we don't let our visitors up there. It's a little bit of a dangerous climb, but they can see it, from the observation deck. So I think that's probably why it has been maintained in such good order, because we don't have people up and down. But we do actually on the property have a first order lens that came from Sombrero Lighthouse. So despite the fact that we don't allow people to climb all the way up into the lens room, they still have an opportunity to really get up close and personal with a Fresnel lens that's much bigger than ours, but it gives them a real understanding of the science and the technology behind that upgrade to the lighthouse.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I remember when I went in there, that first order lens on display is just breathtaking.
It's great.
Yeah, it is. And it's been 25 years since I was there, but it seems to me, I remember just seeing that a second I walked in, like it's on display. So it's like the first thing you see as you go into the museum.
Yeah, we've changed the footprint for traffic control. So it's one of the last things you see. We're trying to find ways to upgrade that experience now. We're busy and we want to make sure people keep moving. So we've changed the traffic flow, but they do get that same up close and personal connection to it. And we've signposted it much better so folks know what they're looking at and understand how it works and how it improved lighthouse functionality around the world.
Right. Well, it's certainly one of the highlights there. There's other highlights as well, but that's a visual highlight for sure. So you mentioned it earlier with I don't think it was the case at first when the lighthouse went into service, but eventually there was an assistant keeper along with the principal keeper. Is that right?
Yes. So, and we've had assistant keepers since the beginning, and that's why Barbara became her husband's assistant before he died. And then Barbara had a series of assistants, both at the old lighthouse and the current lighthouse, and that carried on until the lighthouse was decommissioned. There was always an assistant. I mean, whether or not there was a person in that role, but there was always an assistant keeper
Position
for the property, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. You mentioned earlier, I think you said there were 3 women keepers in the history of the light station. I know there was another one in the early 1900s. The third one, I'm not sure about off the top of my head, but can you tell me about maybe the other 2 besides Barbara that we haven't talked
So
about?
the second lighthouse keeper, female lighthouse keeper that we have, she's only there for a really short time, and it's the same scenario, I think, probably like most lighthouses. Her husband got the job. John Carroll was his name. He was assigned as principal lighthouse keeper, I think, in 1888. And then he also gets sick and dies, and his wife, who is Mary Amanda Carroll, takes over as principal lighthouse keeper in 1889. She just happens to be the granddaughter of Barbara Maberty, which is kind of a neat thing. So it doesn't, like, we always tell folks when Barbara is either let go or whatever disconnected her from the lighthouse, her family's connection is not done, because her granddaughter ends up being the lighthouse keeper through marriage. She had married John Carroll, and then she dies as well, so she only serves for about a year. And then the family that takes over from the Carrolls is usually the other female lighthouse keeper that folks know, and that's the Bethels, Mary Bethel. And she and her husband take over that property as soon as the Carrolls are done. Mary Bethel's husband dies. He has an accident, falls off a ladder, and deteriorates, and Mary Bethel is then promoted. She had been assistant lighthouse keeper for him and then was promoted to principal lighthouse keeper. She's assigned as assistant lighthouse keeper in 1890, and then after his accident, she gets promoted in 1908. She's there till 1913, so she's got a good 20 plus years on that property as well as either assistant or principal lighthouse keeper.
That's pretty impressive, and it's another very unusual thing about Key West Lighthouse to have a couple of women keepers who were there for so long. And I'm glad you mentioned the legacy of Barbara's family that continued as keepers later. So that's a really good point. So before we move along, anything else that we haven't covered that comes to mind for you that really stands out as far as the human history of keepers and families there?
We just have, especially the last family, so Mary Bethel's family, their family stayed very much connected to the property and therefore very connected to us. And they shared just a lot of their personal remembrances. It's easy to walk into that property now because we are in such a touristy location and not think about that human element. And what we've done is really try to incorporate those stories. There were kids born and raised in the house on the property, and that gets lost in the shuffle. Kids who grew up. One of the family members, I think it was Mary Bethel's grandson, told us he remembers going to the top of the lighthouse and just falling asleep on the observation deck when it was a cool breeze up there, and it was not as breezy on the ground. He would go up there and just take a nap, and it's these little things that are so endearing, and that provides us that human element that we can then relay to our visitors who look at it like it's a tourist attraction rather than someone's home, rather than someone's livelihood. I think that's just a little aside we always incorporate.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's endearing to think of this little kid sleeping on the top of the lighthouse, and we've got pictures of him on the property riding his pet goat, that used to help maintain the lawn.
Oh, wow.
Goats to maintain the grass, and it's things you don't think about until you're told or shown photos. That really brings it home that it's someone's life and someone's livelihood.
Yeah, well, it's those little personal firsthand details that bring a place to life.
It does.
They're so important. It's always like finding hidden treasure when you find those things. So let's jump ahead in history. Why was the light deactivated in 1969?
The Coast Guard deemed it no longer necessary for navigation in this area. The light had been electrified years earlier. They just didn't need it anymore. And as an aid for navigation, they decided to decommission it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I'm wondering, why the lens was left in, but certainly if they had kept the light active, they along the line, they would have replaced it with more modern generations of lighting equipment, and that lens would have been removed and possibly destroyed. So it's actually maybe lucky it was deactivated and not touched at that time. Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons I think that we still have that, we're so lucky to still have that lens placed in the lighthouse, is because even before the decommissioning, that property had really been out of service. And Key West was the seat for the 7th District for a long time. And we had Coast Guard high-ranking Coast Guard families living on that property to protect it. Make sure it was okay. It was like one of the primo locations, of course, on the island, big area, not nice acreage. It's in Key West terms. And I think that had something to do with it. The other thing that they decided to do before they decommissioned the lighthouse was turn it over to our organization 3 years earlier to operate as a military museum. So it was still a functioning navigational aid in 1966 when we worked with the Coast Guard, who then turned the property over to our county, who we are operating it on behalf of the county, and they turned it into a military museum. And I think that helped preserve what was on the property, as opposed to other lighthouses that had those items removed. We were already a functioning museum and a navigational aid for about 3 years overlapping.
Right. And there was never really a period of abandonment, as there have been at many lighthouses that were subject to vandalism and everything.
No, we were the lighthouse property became a real dumping ground in an educated way for military surplus. We have the Coast Guard and we had the Navy here. And after World War II, and they had commandeered, we had a lot of technology and weapons and uniforms and you name it. As surplus at this point. I think they wanted a location to put it. Government in DC cherry picked what they wanted, of course, and left everything else. I mean, for a while there, they had a Japanese sub on the property when it was still a functioning lighthouse.
Wow.
There was a Blue Angels jet on that property at some point during its military museum days. It was kind of neat. I think that's what helped really preserve the tower as is, because that museum opened before the decommissioning.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So the museum has obviously evolved over the years, but you still have the museum and the keeper's house there. Can you tell me a bit more about the museum as it exists now? What's there for people to see? We talked about the first order lens on display, of course.
Yeah. So now we did a big project. Well, we predates my time, but in the early 90s. There had been a lot of add-ons to make it a military museum on the property. And the thinking was we wanted to remove it from being a military museum and kind of honor the property as it should be as a lighthouse. So they removed a lot of the enclosed porches, little add-ons that they had done to the building. And they brought it back to it like in 1885 was, I think, their target date to make the property appear as it would be in 1885 with the house. And they went through painstaking efforts to make that happen, to make it feel original. Like the military museum had never existed on the footprint. So what we do is continue to honor that. We educate about what's the importance of our geography here, why lighthouses, why so many lighthouses, Key West in general, like kind of putting it into perspective. When the lighthouse was built, how tiny we were as a community, and we relied on everything coming in via boat, and therefore navigational aids were instrumental in ensuring those items got here. We go through talking about the hurricane, the first tower, the second tower, and then we talk really about the human interest stories, life at the lighthouse, who the major lighthouse keepers were and their families, and what their general roles and responsibilities were. Part of that in the three-dimensional is the objects that the families who had a connection to the lighthouse have donated to us. So we were very lucky that they had held on to the dishes that they used when they lived in the house, and a couple pieces of furniture. Also, it was nice to be able to include instruments, general household. So you really get a sense of people living there and working, and what their daily lives would have looked like.
Right. Well, that's the most important stuff as far as I'm concerned. So you mentioned the kind of restoration of the house by eliminating some of the additions that had happened over the years. Has the society been involved in other restorations, maybe of the lighthouse tower as well?
Yes, we are pretty aggressive with maintaining that facility. We understand our environment is harsh. We have salt air, it can get very windy. We're in bad weather prone areas with hurricanes. We're very aware of that, and we understand being proactive rather than reactive is the way to be. And the property is owned by our Monroe County. We work with them pretty tightly to have any major work done. So we had just last year, we had metal workers come in to help reinforce the observation deck because some of it had started rusting. The stairs, that the 88 steps that lead up to the top of the tower that folks are using on a daily basis, to make sure that we didn't have any issues with that. They repainted. They cleaned. We had new lightning rod put on there because that's always a concern too. We're constantly doing work. And actually last year we had the oil house worked on rather than the tower, which is just adjacent to the tower itself. We had that. We had oil butts built to put on displays to give that idea of what it would have looked like there. So we are constantly doing work. And then beginning after October this year, we're slated to do more works to the house. It did sustain a little bit of damage with a tree falling on a portion of it in Hurricane Ian about 2 years ago now. We're glad it really only ripped off the gutter and hit a corner of the porch. It could have been a lot worse. But we've got grant money to be able to go back in there and shore everything up and make sure that the property is fully accessible and enjoyable for visitors. So we're always looking for what's the next project? What do we need to do before something happens?
Yeah, that's great that you're so proactive, because you have to be. And of course, it's never finished. It never will be finished.
The tower will need work in 2 years just when we're done with the cottage. It's always something.
Absolutely. And as you said, such a harsh environment. Lighthouses in general in harsh environments, but I think yours especially in some ways. So you kind of said it already, but when people visit there, you said there are 88 stairs in the tower, and people can climb the lighthouse, but only to the observation deck level. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes. So you can climb the 88 stairs. It's a nice, tight, you get to know your neighbors and passersby real well. And then up to the observation deck, the ladder that takes you up to the lens room is very precarious. We have opted to not allow for folks to be able to get up there, but having that Sombrero Key Lighthouse Fresnel lens made that decision a lot easier. So we feel like you're still getting the benefit of it without having the access to it. And you can see it when you get up to the observation deck, but it's 88 steps. You get a wonderful view. It's still one of the tallest structures in Key West. You have a 360-degree view of neighboring islands. You get all these cute rooftops, and the trees are blooming. It really is spectacular.
It's been 25 years, but I kind of remember how spectacular it was when I was there. So I was looking at your website and various events and things, and something that looked very intriguing was something called the Key West Lighthouse Sunset Experience. So what's that about?
We started doing that in COVID. We were trying to find creative ways to let people experience our properties without the congestion. And we decided to start renting it out privately at night. So people, small groups and big groups, I think will take about 8 at maximum, come onto the property 45 minutes before sunset. They get a couple bottles of wine or Prosecco, a nice charcuterie board. And they get the property all to themselves. We just have our one staff member there to make sure everybody's, happy, and you can climb the tower, take your wine with you, and watch the sunset from the top of the tower. And then you get another, 45 minutes after sunset to just sit and continue to enjoy. It's great. We didn't know, people would be keen on that because it's a big property for 3 people to be on it at one time, but man, they love the solace of it. They love the tranquility of that experience. We have birthdays that are celebrated there, anniversaries. We get a lot of wedding proposals for that, as you might imagine. You get that exclusivity on
Yeah.
the property. So I mean, it runs the gamut of people wanting to be there at night, and it's proven really successful. And that property is stunning. And the lighthouse is on the western end of the island, so you really get unobstructed views
That sounds
of
absolutely,
that sunset over the water. It's gorgeous.
yeah, sounds absolutely amazing. And of course, there's quite a tradition of enjoying sunsets in Key West.
Yeah.
It's like a daily celebration.
It is. And so if you don't want to be in the hustle and bustle with everyone else, the lighthouse really has ticked boxes for people that enjoy the quiet.
That's a really good idea, and it's always special being in a lighthouse at sunset or after dark. It's something really
Yeah.
special. Yeah, that was a really good idea.
We get really positive feedback and a lot of return guests year in and year out now. That's part of when they book their hotel, they call us to see what we have available because they just enjoy it so much.
I can completely understand. So I have 3 final questions for you, and these are for bonus points, okay? All right. So the first of the last 3 questions is, I've experienced Key West, so it's been a while. I certainly got a feel for what a special place it is. What do you personally like most about Key West?
Everything. I
Well,
love it. I love how it is a big city feel in a very small town. Because the influx and outgoing of visitors here keeps things fresh. But I see people I know everywhere I go, and there's some level of comfort there. And the people that live here really care about their history and their culture, whether they were born and raised here or whether they're transplants. There's something very inviting about this place, and it's palpable, I think, to the people that live here. It's hard to get rid of us once we're here. So I think, to me, that's the best part of it. And maybe the visitors don't get to see that as often, but it's not easy still to live on an island. Even though we have a road, even though we have an airport, we're still very disconnected. And now we have other problems of being very expensive. And you really have to want to live here, but you have that support network. And I think that's the thing I like most about Key West.
Yeah. Okay. The second of the last 3 questions for bonus points is, what do you think the lighthouse, or light station, I should probably say, means to the city of Key West?
It's symbolic in so many ways. I think people look to lighthouses for guidance and navigation. I mean, that's what they're there for. We use it for a lot of community events. We offer it, we host a lot of free events on that property where the community is invited. So I think that they take that guidance and they understand that we're here to support them. If it's a fundraiser for somebody, we just had a fundraiser for someone on Sunday night at the property for a local who was going through some medical issues. Like, we're open. So I think that for the city, they know that we're a resource, both educationally and on a community level. And it's so identifiable, and I mean, it's on one of our local banks. Their credit card has our Key West Lighthouse as their credit card image.
Yeah.
So I think it means a lot. I think it means a lot to people. Why us and not all the other historic buildings? We'll take it because we think it's a stunning building as well.
Definitely. It making me think about how lighthouses in many places are kind of like centerpieces for the community and the most reproduced icons, I think, by businesses and all kinds of people, as you said, by historical societies and on and on. So visually, there's certainly centerpieces of the communities. So your last question for extra bonus points, okay, is, what do you enjoy most, or what, and that could be past, what have you enjoyed most about your association with Key West Lighthouse?
I think my association with them, with the lighthouse itself and the people who live there, being able to come in. A few years ago, we did a big overhaul of the exhibit space in the keeper's quarters, and it went from being very much nuts and bolts about the lighthouse, and I re-envisioned the place to tell that human story. And I think that that's been my favorite part about working with that lighthouse is a lighthouse, and we have lighthouse people come and they know what they're talking about. They know what they're looking for. And there's not a lot that I'm going to be able to teach them. What I can teach them about the people that live there and the importance of the lighthouse, not just ours, but all the reef, how, that whole system down here, why we need it, why it's important. And we're really grateful to the people that were putting their life at risk on a daily basis to keep the rest of Key West safe. So I liked that I was able to reinterpret their stories and put that in a museum, and it really hadn't existed before.
Yeah. Well, that's really nice, because I certainly agree that it's the people again that are the most important part of the history of any place, but with lighthouses definitely. So Dr. Cori Convertito, I just want to thank you so much for this time today. It's a real pleasure meeting you virtually and talking with you. I hope to get down there again and see the place. I really, really do. I'm determined to make that happen one of these years. It's not going to happen this year, but I hope to get down there, because it really is such a special place and a beautiful lighthouse and a beautiful museum with
Well,
one of the.
Very much. We all take a lot of pride in it, and we feel so fortunate to be able to be stewards of that property during this phase of its life.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
To learn more about the Key West Arts and Historical Society, visit kwahs.org. All the information you will need for visiting the lighthouse and society's other properties is on the site.
As I mentioned, the only time I've been in Key West was back in 1999 for a conference that got cut short by a hurricane. So it was an interesting visit. I'm sure you have some experience with Key West Lighthouse. Is that right, Ralph?
Oh yeah, been there I don't know how many times. One of the last times we were there, we stayed at the little hotel next door to it, and get into the room, and I opened up the window, and I could almost reach out and touch the lighthouse. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. So while we're there, I'd never been on the Hemingway tour, the Hemingway house, which is right across the street. And so we did that tour, and when you get up on the balcony there, they point over to the lighthouse, because he's referring to it as Hemingway's light, and that's how he would get home from either being drunk at Sloppy Joe's or on his boat. So having been there the day before, I'm in the lighthouse, and I got to check off one of those cool little things of being in a lighthouse by yourself. And then each time you're in a different lighthouse by yourself, it's one of those really cool things. And this time it was middle of summer and there was nobody in there. So I was up at the top, and I look out the door there to the gallery, and I see the guy, the same tour guide, giving the same spiel out at the Hemingway house. So I just leaned on the door frame, and I'm just waiting, because I'm waiting for him to turn over and point, because I don't remember exactly what the text he was saying was, but it worked out perfectly that he turns over, and as he points, I kind of take my right arm off, and I give people a salute like I'm Hemingway, and it cracked everybody up, and the guy's like, what is he? And he turns around, and he's like, oh, that's why you're laughing.
Yeah. Too bad you didn't have a chance to put on like a Hemingway disguise, put on a gray beard and stuff. That would have really freaked him out.
Yeah.
That's cool. When I was there, I saw the Hemingway house, but I didn't have time to tour it. That's one of the big landmarks there, of course, as well. But it's a great lighthouse, and it's a great city. What do you think of Key West on the whole?
Compared to the first time I went there, it's now a disappointment, because they let the cruise ships in now.
Oh, okay.
Back then it was so much better. It was already built up, not like back like when Jimmy Buffett first went there, but it was already built up. But comparatively speaking, now that the big cruise ships come in, it's really hard to get a room there now. It's really expensive, but the place is so cool. If you can manage to get in there just to spend the day and just wander around the old streets, look at the old houses, and just the way they were built, because a lot of those were built, I was told, by a bunch of the original houses were built by ship makers. That's why they survived so many of the hurricanes, and they're not just typical, joints in the house. They're built more like ships, so they're able to withstand, the winds and everything. So there's just so much cool architecture there.
There really is. When I think of Key West, I think of a couple other cities I've been to. That would be New Orleans and Savannah, Georgia, and it's like they're all planets unto themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
They're very, very unique. So before we sign off today, I want to talk a little bit about the U.S. Lighthouse Society online research catalog we mentioned earlier. The full name, the official name of it, is the J. Candace Clifford Lighthouse Research Catalog. And of course, it's named for Candace Clifford, who was the historian for the U.S. Lighthouse Society and was one of the best lighthouse researchers in the country. People can access the online catalog at archives.uslhs.org. archives.uslhs.org. We've been gradually moving selected photos and documents, all kinds of things from the digital archives into the public research catalog so people can access it. And you've been doing that for a few years now. You've actually, at this point, I would say, done more of that than anybody else easily. You've really done an amazing job with that. So how's it coming along?
It's coming great. We got the continental United States done. Well, by done, I mean what was originally in like the original folders. Alaska, Hawaii are done doing most of the Virgin Islands and,
Outlying territories
yeah,
and that sort of thing.
thank you. So we're starting that. And now, since all that's done, we're going back and I'm actually entering all of your stuff. I'm going to enter Candace's stuff in there. And just the amount of information that's in there between photographs, documents, stories that from interviews with keepers' kids, there's just so much information in there. It's just so cool to go through. And if you haven't been to it, I really recommend you just spend a couple minutes going through there. Find your favorite lighthouse, just pick on a couple things there, and you'll be amazed what you can find in there.
Yeah. I would say if it hasn't happened already, it's well on its way to being the #1 source of lighthouse research online. It's never, as you said, when you say it's finished, it's really not finished, of course,
Right.
and never will be. And I want to mention for anybody listening who either works for or has some relationship with a lighthouse organization or historical society or whatever, we invite people to, we kind of a reciprocal arrangement. If people want to get access to the folder with our materials about their lighthouse, we can provide access to that. We invite people, if they want to share their historical files, pictures, documents, and so forth, to load them into a folder in our archives. It can be flagged, so the access can be limited to the public and that sort of thing. But we, as much as possible, we want to be kind of a place. I'm looking for a better word here. But
we want to be the go-to.
That's a good
collection.
Yeah, the go-to collection for lighthouses, but we want to be the source. Anyway, so again, the job will never be finished once you do a pass like you've done. There's always be new stuff to enter down the road. Right. And as you mentioned, I am gradually uploading my own materials. My collection I've garnered over about 40 years of lighthouse research. So it's going to take me a while to finish uploading all that, but I'm working on it.
Right.
So
if I can put one request out there, also, if you want to just send a more up-to-date photo of your local lighthouse, we'd like to get, because we have a lot of historical photos on there. We have some things, all through the years, but if we can get like a recent photo on there to help keep, what's it look like now, we'd like to be able to add that to our archives as well and put that on there. Of course, put your name with the photo credit on there as well.
That's a really good point. Yeah. When I look at my photos, some lighthouses in New England I photographed many times over the years, including pretty recently, but there's others I haven't photographed in 30 years.
Right.
So my photos are not necessarily real up to date. So yeah, as you said, we can use up-to-date photos for sure. Also photos of lighthouse keepers. As far as historic photos, that's something we're absolutely always looking for. If anybody has a photo of their lighthouse keeper ancestor or whatever, we would love to add that to our collection. And to
their family.
And their family, absolutely. Yeah, family members as well. Before we sign off, I want to remind people to visit uslhs.org to learn more about tours, the passport program, and everything else the U.S. Lighthouse Society offers.
Remember that donations and memberships help support this podcast. If you listen using Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us.
So thanks again for co-hosting today, Ralph, and thank you for everything you do for lighthouses.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, and same for you.
Thank you. So in next week's episode, we will have a chat with 3 people at Absecon Lighthouse, one that's mispronounced often. Yep. Absecon Lighthouse in New Jersey. We'll be talking about a legendary volunteer there, the late Buddy Grover, who I
Excellent.
was lucky enough to interview last year. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
Keep a good light.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.